Welcome to Founders and Funders, a very special episode powered by Salesbricks, where we dive deep into what it really takes to build and scale a SaaS company to an IPO. Today, we're joined by three industry giants, leaders who have done what few ever will. Bill Macaitis helped take not one, but two of the most iconic SaaS companies public, Zendesk and Slack, as their chief marketing officer. If you've ever used a product-led SaaS tool, you felt the impact of Bill's go-to-market strategies. We've also got Adam Aarons, who is the revenue leader that scaled Okta from less than $1 million all the way to IPO, defining the modern security sales motion along the way. His approach to building high-performance teams set the blueprint for countless SaaS companies today. And finally, we've got Ross Biestman, who recently took ServiceTitan public. Leading the company through its hyper-growth phase as the chief revenue officer, he's a leader who's not only seen the IPO finish line, but helped build the roadmap to get there. It's rare to get this level of expertise in one room, so let's get to it. Vamos!
Super excited to have you on this episode. We'd love to really pick your brain, learn about the stories, and actually the hard journey that you guys have been through the process of taking a company public. I actually wanted to start off with a fast forward into IPO day, which everyone here in this room obviously experienced. What was going through you guys' heads, emotions, feelings, anxiety? Love to hear what you guys had to go through that day.
I'll open it up. I mean, my morning, it felt like an imposter. Like you talk about imposter zone for an individual. I was there. I didn't know. It just didn't feel right. Like the whole morning just felt inauthentic. I met with my counterparts and colleagues about 40 minutes before we went on the NASDAQ, started to get a feel for it. And it became more real when we got in the elevator. The CIO of NASDAQ, Brad, was also my champion in the account. So he was our sponsor for the day. That started to really make it real. By the time we got up on the floor, it was hard to ignore. But once we got off is when it got really emotional for me. And so I had a moment where when we stepped off the floor, my son called me and it just hit me. I broke down and still it gets me emotionally. But up until that moment, I felt it. It wasn't real until we walked off the floor and my son called me on video and I started crying.
Adam, did it feel like you didn't deserve it?
It just wasn't registering. It was like, I got up in the morning, I got on the elevator, CEO's wife and kids got on the elevator with me. I was like, oh, hey, how you doing, Roxanne? It just didn't feel like I was in the room. Like it just didn't feel real until it sort of built up. Every moment was a little bit more real. I mean, you dream about that moment. I don't know what it's like to hit a grand slam. I don't know what it's like to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl, but having that moment, it was just surreal and it wasn't in a moment, it was hours of surreal, like until I stepped off that stage and got a chance to talk to my son. It was wild.
So mine is very recent. So I think it happened a little over a month ago.
Yeah.
Thank you,
dude.
Thank you. And I will echo Aaron's comment about it being surreal. I was very excited that this moment was coming. And I woke up at about 3:45 in the morning Eastern and decided that I was going to go on a run. So go outside. Times Square is where our hotel was, and it's about 20 degrees outside. And I'm wearing California shorts and a t-shirt and running shoes, and just decide to go running through Central Park. And had this incredible conversation with someone that was super impactful and helping us get better as a team. But then when it actually came to the day, being suited and booted, it is a surreal experience. And what they don't train you on is that it's a full production. This is not just a listing event, but this is a production with a producer and everything is regimented, but there's no necessary training for that. And you're being moved from room to room, but you're with your teammates. And then to Adam's point, it is only at this point where they release you from the actual exchange and you walk outside and you get to see other teammates that have on their own dime flown to New York to be part of the process, looking at you through a glass, almost like a zoo animal, but knowing that they wanted to be their support and champion. And then the family. I had such a moment with my wife and two sons that have had incredible sacrifice. They demonstrated incredible sacrifice. The amount of planes and nights away and baseball games that I've missed, for my 9-year-old son to hug me and say, "You did a great job at work today. I'm proud of you." That's where I broke down. And then hugging my dad, who was a former sales leader that had the opportunity to do this in his career, and him telling me that he was proud of me. And then actually, I talk a lot about this with members of my team now as I reflect on that day. I looked at one of our sales leaders' fathers who was just off in the distance, just looking at what he has helped to create, and seeing that joy from a father that wasn't even my own, but the father of a teammate, to have that amount of pride was one of the truly most rewarding experiences that I've ever observed.
I grew up a business nerd. I've been watching CNBC for a long time and seen a lot of bell ringings, and to actually be there. So this was for Zendesk. We IPO'd on New York Stock Exchange, and generally either go NASDAQ or NYSE. Since I was the CMO, I got to go out there in advance and scout out both options and make some promotional decisions. When it actually happens, it's crazy. I mean, you're on the NYSE floor. It's so iconic. You kind of go up there on the little ledge. We cheered so loud that Jim Cramer, who was filming at the time for CNBC, turned around and he's like, "What's going on?" And it was like, "Oh, it's the Zendesk IPO." And it's kind of a crazy experience. And they kind of usher you through each section, right? But, as the marketer, it's such a big promotional type activity that, there's a little bit of nerves there. You want to make sure you're doing a lot of interviews post as well. You want to make sure your CEO's on message. It's something that, you've seen for so long growing up. And it was just an amazing experience.
As to Ross's point, I was walking down the back stairwell and my son happened to call me and I just broke down. And then when I got to the bottom of the stairwell, 4 of my sales guys were waiting there, just to Ross's point, to come out on their own dime. And I mean, I just remember it like it was yesterday. That's when those moments became really real. After that, man, I think my first phone call was to my wife, who was probably in the room with my son, and then my dad, who was a sales leader and I admired and I wanted to be like.
Ross, what was yours?
So I've been really fortunate to have incredible teammates throughout my career, and teammates that have trusted me to come work with me at several different companies. And so as many of those that were there, we grabbed arms with each other and we took a picture and we send it to the other leaders that we had previously worked for, say that the team's still together. And the first one that I actually sent was to, outside of my dad, the greatest mentor in my life, was my rugby coach at Cal named Jack Clark, who is still the rugby coach. And several of the guys that are on my team were teammates of mine back in the day, 18 to 22 years later. What he taught us when we were undergraduates helped to keep this team together and do something extraordinary.
That's incredible. Bill, what was yours?
I think mine was just call my wife, right? It was such an amazing experience, and being on the floor of the NYSE, but certainly you're talking to, your current coworkers, past coworkers, mentors. I mean, it's just an amazing milestone, and you just want to share that great moment with as many people as you can.
So next question I'd love to really drill into is like picking the right racehorse or not knowing that the company would go public. I'm looking at you, Adam. You started at Okta at a very early stage. I think maybe less than 20 people in the company when you joined. And I think you had a story where Mark Cranny was kind of picking the racehorse for you, or at least leading you to a company that might be a big one to become a successful security company. What was going through your head at such an early stage where you were sales rep number 1 potentially, or sales leader number 1?
I was actually employee 35 and there was a couple sellers and sales leaders there, but I was able to get in there sub $1 million in revenue. Cranny was a operating partner at Andreessen Horowitz. Okta was the first seed investment that Andreessen Horowitz ever made. And then Greylock was another investor. And David Echeria, who's the CEO of MongoDB, was my CEO at Blade Logic, and he was at Greylock at the time. And so both were pointing me at Okta, but I did a lot of homework, man. I mean, I spent 3 months interviewing Okta. I brought in 2 CIOs. I vetted the heck out of it because it was so early. And some people told me not to do it. The old CEO, Steve Walski of PTC, sat down with me and went through it and gave me the advice to go do it. So I vetted the heck out of it. The best advice I think I got was from David Echeria. He said, when you're looking at an opportunity like this, think of 4 things. Number 1 is in a big enough market. If it's a big enough market, whether you're one or two, you're going to have a good outcome. He said, number two, find technology that disrupts the way people do their business. So like is a fundamental way that disrupts it. And then I always thought about that as like, how do I quantify that? So I've kind of added that as like, how do you disrupt it in a way that you can help them quantify? The third is who's the team? Like you're going to go to hell and back with these folks. So be sure that you know the team, you're good with the people, and you can work with them. And then the fourth is find good money. Good money follows good money. So if you get Series A money and it's from great investors, they follow each other. And so those four things I found, very clearly. And then just doing my homework, referencing, bringing in customers that I trusted to vet the tech with me and things like that.
That's awesome. And Ross, we used to work together at Lithium, and I remember very well the day we got the news that you were leaving the company. The entire sales organization was looking up to you to lead us to the next stage of the business. It was a huge blow for us that, you decided to leave, but you left behind a lot of best practices, guidance. You taught the company how to win. When you joined ServiceTitan, what kind of was going through your head around your betting and how you were qualifying your next opportunity?
Thanks, Jonathan. Super proud of the work that we did together at Lithium. For everyone, Jonathan was always first guy in the office, managing everything that relates to our deal desk and helping us win. So thanks again, Jonathan. ServiceTitan, I didn't intend to originally find it, but I was actually working on a deal for Lithium at that time where then CEO Rob Tarkov asked me to go to Tel Aviv to negotiate a contract with Waze, the traffic application company. And I ran into one of ServiceTitan's investors, the first venture capital investor, Series A, Byron Dieter from Biestman Venture Partners. And we ended up going out for dinner and discussing this opportunity that he got super excited about and said, hey, there's a great chance that they're going to bring on a sales leader. And I think you should evaluate this. And it was interesting in that my history, whether it had been at Lithium or at Adobe, where I cut my teeth early on in my technology career, was always working with enterprise B2B or Fortune 500 clients. And it was such a contrast in terms of ServiceTitan's business model and who their ideal customer profile was, which are tradespeople, plumbers, heating and air conditioning technicians, and electrical businesses. But it was only when I went and met with the two co-founders of the business that I had a true appreciation that no matter what, I knew that these two guys were going to be winners. And it was because of a few reasons. Number one was I really bought into the mission and the story. The fact that these two had gone to great schools, but they were immigrants to this country and their parents found virtue as being contractors. They knew exactly what they were going to build and who they were going to build it for. And then what really put me over the edge to think about this as a long-term opportunity was having the opportunity to go visit customers in action during the due diligence process. And I learned a couple of very important things. One was that technology was mission critical and that every single person in those businesses was utilizing that technology for the lion's share of their day. The second was that it produced a huge business outcome for those businesses. So the return on investment was palpable to everyone. And three, that it actually, interestingly, for the first time in my career, it checked this box, which is it not only creates incredible business outcomes, but it has a positive impact on the lives of people that work in those businesses. And for those reasons, it really put me over the edge to think about this as a great opportunity. I continue to be impressed with the trajectory.
I think you mentioned something about customers. You guys started at companies where you held roles that were really close to the customers and putting the customers as the hero of the business. A lot of early stage founders today are starting to learn how to engage and interact with customers, especially if these founders are technical founders that never really had that kind of role before. What advice would you give them in your roles as CMOs, head of sales, CROs, around how to balance their work day, work week, around being close to the customers, listening to the customers, having that impact and influence the way that they do things and they build things today?
Well, for me as a former CMO, I would say the further you remove from the customers, the further you remove from the business. And it gets hard. I feel for the founders because their list of responsibilities is just ever growing and their time is spread so thin, but it is so incredibly powerful to go out there and just talk to customers. I know one of the things we did at Slack to make sometimes that a little bit easier and accessible for everyone is we did the Net Promoter Score survey, and we do it down to the individual level. We do it to everyone. And when that open-ended feedback would come in, we actually created like a Slack NPS channel. And so anyone could go in there and see exactly what the customers were saying, which I think helped out a lot too. Slack was a very like customer-centric type company. But I think anytime you can have customers, whether you're coming in, whether you're doing like an all hands, you just have customers come in, whether you maybe pull more people out to your user conference, like maybe you don't always send everyone at the company there, but maybe some of these back-end developers who never get a chance to talk to customers, have them come out there just so they can get in front and talk to customers. And certainly, as a CEO, I think the more you can talk to customers, the better you're going to be off.
Okay, so I had someone from the growth team over at Nooks. I asked before we jumped on for a question. This one came from Jesse Marseille, and this kind of echoes what you were saying. Tell me if you agree. Number one thing you have to do is capture the customer voice. The customer voice informs the product design path. It produces case studies, sales collateral, and marketing material. It's the DNA from which everything else grows. How do you feel about that one?
Yeah, I love the sentiment. I might say, capture the customer pain, right? Like maybe a slight variation there where, I think for all these big companies, they just tapped into some root pain, right? And they really thought about it and how to make individuals' lives easier, right? And more accessible. But I think to the voice, there's an element, certainly on the marketing side, is like, hey, how do you describe what you do, right? And I think a lot of times as founders, we're so ahead of the market. And sometimes it's like you have to put it in your customers' words. Like, what are the little words? How do they describe it, right? How do they talk about like what their pain is? And I think the more you can align to the customer from, a product roadmap perspective, from a voice and tone perspective, from a just, really identifying that pain point, the better you're going to be off.
So I think one of the big things for early stage companies who are aspiring to be in your guys' footsteps around taking a company public or a huge milestone that you guys all achieved is finding the right talent at the right place at the right time at the right moment for the business. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your guys' experience around hiring and how critical that is for your business, whether it be replacing somebody, up-leveling somebody, or even like introducing this new role because it's the right time for the company. Would love to learn from you guys, like what those roles were very pivotal that actually contributed to a lot of the success around going to that path to the IPO and really scaling the business. Is there any example roles or folks that you wanted to call out?
I don't think it's about one individual. I don't think there's one irreplaceable cog. Like, I'll tell you, there were people I didn't think we needed, but then after we got there, I thought that I don't know if we could have done it without them. Like,
Well,
that's what you're saying.
Yeah, well, what roles were that, and what time of the business was that?
Not comfortable saying it in a public forum. I can tell you, like the head of product marketing and I used to fight all the time, and like gnarly fights. And I think it made us better. And I think I learned a lot from it as to like the person I didn't want to be in those moments.
Yeah, I would maybe add to that, Jonathan. Like, I do agree with these guys are saying. I don't know if there's one critical role that you have to invest in. I mean, certainly for all these companies, at some point you need to build the go-to-market function, and I think that's really critical. I will say, come from the marketing side, when you go IPO, you need a ton of customer references, right? And I think that is something that snuck up on us a little bit. We started building that large binder out of all these different customer references and the videos and the stories, but we did it like during the process and a little late. So if there's maybe one role, there's a couple of like Adam and Russ had said, there are very like IPO specific type roles, investor relations. And on the marketing side for us, it was just having a customer reference person. That's all they do is like get these customer references, build these relationships, because you need those in so many places when you're going IPO for the roadshow. And there's so many people that want to talk to existing customers that's a really critical function.
That be like a chief customer officer these days, Bill? They all change. It could be anything.
Like literally, it could be customer reference manager. I guess it could be a CCO, but it's just someone that's like
chief engagement.
Yeah, go out there and, get these customer references and get them to agree. Because anyone that like tries to get an enterprise customer reference, I know it's a really hard process. You have to go through like all these hoops and all these approvals. And so it just takes some time. And so it just helps if you get a little ahead of that. If you're thinking about it going IPO, that's definitely a big thing to factor in.
Would love to talk a little bit more about culture for companies. So when you started at these companies, Okta, ServiceTitan, Slack. There's a lot of things that you bring into the company around best practices, things that worked in the past, and also like culture of winning. So in sales, forecasting process, discipline around building that accountability within the organization, the teamwork that needs to happen between the business development team, the customer success team, the sales team. What were some of the things that you brought into these companies that really added a lot of value and helped accelerate the growth within the companies? Love to hear from you, Adam, what that was for y'all.
Yeah, man. Again, I jumped on the shoulders of greatness. So I grabbed the playbooks that I had learned throughout my career. I was at Blade Logic prior to joining Okta as an area vice president. We went public and then got acquired by BMC Software. So I got to watch what John McMahon was able to do there. And he's always been a great mentor and a guiding force for me. So I took advantage of those playbooks. I went to Creaney too and took those playbooks and said, if I'm going to go do this on my own, I'm going to follow people that have been highly successful at it. My first job was as an SDR at PTC, and that's where those playbooks started. When I came in, it was learning Okta so that I could configure them for the business model that we had. And that took me about 4 or 5 months worth of just observing and working. So during that time, I threw the freaking thing on my back. Like I remember asking Creaney, I was like, what do I do? He's like, what do you mean? What do you do? He's like, you close every effing deal in sight. Like you go get those deals. He's like, the first 12 months at Opsware, I did all that myself, Creaney. I put all that shit on my back. I carried that thing over the line. And that's what I did, man. As I was figuring it out, I went into the field. I met with every account partner over $1 million in revenue. There's not enough deals that I couldn't be on top of them. So I just went in there and got dirty and I learned a ton. What does the sales process look like? It was about building a productivity plan that we could survive with. It was like, okay, how fast can we responsibly, aggressively grow this thing at the fastest possible rate we can? And then how many people do I need? How much revenue would that provide? How much revenue can I build upon that? And how quickly can I get there?
Ross, we both came from a company, Lithium, where we had all day forecast calls, qualifying deals, making sure sales reps are accountable for the deals. What did you bring from that experience, or what did you set new for ServiceTitan when you started there?
So yes, you're right, Jonathan. We did sit through these all-day forecasts every Friday morning with our former CRO.
The Ravinator is what he called him, Ravi. And certainly brought that level of, let's call it, intensity and inspection into the process. But it's a different animal when you're talking about, 15 enterprise deals per quarter in comparison to a velocity business that's doing hundreds of transactions every single month. The question becomes like, how do you do that at scale across the volume of work that is required? And there was a piece of advice that I learned from a gentleman who I think of as a mentor, for those of you that have worked at Salesforce or know in the Valley, a guy named Tony Rodoni, who was the sales leader at Salesforce. And he told me that sales in software is a lot like baseball. And so the question became, how can you compress the measurement period to how much pipeline do we need at the half day, the full day interval? Where should we be from a pacing and linearity perspective every day, every week, every month and quarter? And what ServiceTitan really pushed me to think about is how do you do things on balance by looking at it, not just in the form of an annual plan or a quarterly plan, but how can you be on balance, quote unquote, green across the board, across all your KPIs and segments every single month? And that's been one of the benefits that we've been able to see over the years, is this concept of getting ahead and then staying ahead, which is one of the things that I think has been so impactful here at the organization.
And
Yeah.
Bill, like for you, like velocity at Slack, I'm sure you guys were closing hundreds of deals a day, and probably even at Zendesk. Like, what was that culture like? What did the sausage factory look like for that kind of motion?
Yeah, it was interesting. So I worked at, Salesforce, Zendesk, and Slack, and I'd say Salesforce more sales heavy, Zendesk a little more marketing heavy, and when you go to Slack, very like PLG, like high velocity type heavy, right? So, got to see a nice mixture of both. And the 2 points I would say is like go-to-market's always evolving and changing. So those founders that are thinking about going public, just know that like the playbooks are always evolving, right? There's a lot of emphasis on PLG now, or even product-led sales, and how do these teams work together? And, whether you're targeting enterprise or mid-market or SMB, there's always different playbooks. And certainly with AI coming out now, it's really changing. Don't forget about go-to-market. It's really important, and don't forget to evolve that. The other thing I'd say too is each one of these variants are going to be a little bit different, but I'd say the thing they all have in common is if you want to go public, you have to get really good at forecasting. Right? Like the public markets will absolutely punish you if you miss your numbers, right? And even leading up to it, when you're going to the road show, you have to hit quarters. And now that's specifically what you forecasted. So that takes a little bit of a different muscle. Not as big of a deal if you have a little bit of a variance off what your numbers are. When you're leading up to going IPO, you have to get really good at forecasting. And that's finance muscles, that's sales and marketing muscles, that's, just building out the right models and being able to forecast this, as Tony said, just getting able to know every little hour of the day what it should be.
It adds up to what was mentioning is like building the foundation in the durable business where, there's predictability, there's the right infrastructure to go about and execute constantly.
Yeah. And I would say too, look, if you're in a high velocity business, your life is a little bit easier. It's generally much easier to forecast, high velocity, or even if you're more mid-market. When you start, landing whales in enterprise, that's the hard one, right? Because, one of those deals can make or break your quarter. So there's even, additional rigor there that, Adam and Ross were saying.
And in a lead up to an IPO, it's a much bigger deal. Like it's almost like you can't miss.
You think it's a lead up? Ross is in the trough of discontent. He's got 6 months where every executive's locked up post IPO. You can't miss. And you can never miss.
I think that's the point. Exactly. And everyone talks about the world being different, post flip. But in my opinion, if you operate with that level of rigor always, then nothing changes. The same mission to the customer that we provided 15 years ago is the same mission to be provided to the customer now. And if you operate with this idea that this is just a milestone, right? This is just a day. And the lead up to that is we're going to operate like this always, then you don't have to worry about the world changing.
That really does build out the durable business you were mentioning.
Yeah. Like you've basically kind of ingrained it in the team that IPO is not the end, right? It's not the end. There's still a lot of work.
Yeah. It's and we used to compare it when we were leading up to the IPO, we compared it to you can go gold on a record or you can go multi-platinum, right? Good for you. You got a gold record. Can you go can you do it 5 times? This is just the beginning. You just launched your musical career, Ross. You're going to go make multi-platinum megastar.
Yeah. It's like the IPO is your one hit. And now make a bunch of them.
Because he's been making music this forever. They never stopped rehearsing. They never stopped trying. It's always been give it your best. What's funny about these jobs is the sales leaders, it's always hard. Whether you're doing well or you're doing poorly, you're always trying to get better. You're always looking at ways to get more effective and efficient. It's way more fun when you're having success. But it doesn't matter because when you're having success, you're constantly trying to refine it to get better. It's an infinite loop of efficiency and effectivity that you're always trying to do.
I'd like to actually go into one that's very personal to me, which is kind of the support system you leaders need and receive during the whole journey. A lot of founders today, call it the stage 1, 0 to 3 year founders, they don't know what they're getting into. And you all worked for the founders, the CEOs very closely and see what it takes to build an amazing company. Behind your guys' success is a lot of support, whether it be a parent or a partner, a wife, a spouse, kids that inspire you every day. Nobody really talks about that. It's a very personal area, but I think it's actually really important. And I'd love to just hear your guys' stories around what behind the scenes, what did that look like for you guys? Ross, you mentioned baseball games and games that you weren't able to attend, a bunch of flights left and right. I'd love to peel the onion a little bit and kind of hear about your stories and your support systems to help others that are just going through this journey to prepare for what they need as their foundation.
I think Adam hit the nail on the head. It's hard, but you need those support systems around you to continue encouraging the journey.
I remember when I first joined the business, we were a 100% in-office business. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. The business, as it is today, is headquartered in Los Angeles. And I calculated that I was gone for 100 out of 104 weeks, 4 days a week, and living away from my wife and young children while my wife is a chief marketing officer at another company still. And so we have these agreements with our spouses who put these sacrifices on the table. And it's really important to have those strong relationships and to be really transparent and clear about what are the non-negotiables when it comes to family life. And I think that the hard part for me in the early stages was figuring out that balance. But it was ultimately that when we saw that the hard work was certainly paying off and we were creating a great company, I felt like we were creating a great company together. And I think it's the same for anybody that worked on our teams. It's certainly a sacrifice.
Yeah, an absolute sacrifice. One other thing, maybe a tip I would give to founders too is like having a supportive board is really important. And this is where you get to choose, right? I know a lot of times it's like, oh, I got this term or this valuation or whatever it is, but same thing that I think Adam said earlier in the call, where you want to, like you're interviewing them, you want to put the same due diligence into all these partners that you're choosing, whether, what are they saying about these different, because even like, Andreessen's great and I love Andreessen, but there's like 50 partners there, right? I love Bessemer, but there's 20 partners there, right? Like which one are you getting, right? And do they believe in your philosophy of go to market, right? Like, when I was at Slack, we were PLG, that was very different. Did we just have all kind of classic enterprise sales board members, or did they kind of understand this new motion and how it worked, right? And were they going to support you? And just, what does that connection look like? Because I think the board can be incredibly supportive or incredibly disruptive and put a ton of like additional stress on you as a founder. So I would just say, choose your board members very deliberately.
Yeah, I'd answer it a little different. For me, there were two things I think that really helped me. One were my advisors. I picked a few really good advisors when I just couldn't figure shit out. And I could bounce it off a few people that had been there before me and done that. And then I traveled a lot. The best talent that I have is like, I'll show up when you won't. I'll do things that others just won't do. And for that, I got to show up. And so my wife took on a lot of that. And there was an agreement with us. Like if it ever became too much, I said I'd quit. Unfortunately, she never tested that. And I don't know if I would have had the wherewithal when you're that deep to pull yourself out, but that was the agreement that we made. It was like, hey, look, and dude, I was Marriott Platinum before I was 40. I remember one year I was gone like 265 days out of the year, and I would leave on Monday mornings at 6:30 a.m., but I would be home on Fridays. I would do forecast Fridays, like you guys said, and I would do it so I could drive my kids to school, do the forecast calls. If I do Asia early, get Europe done, get whatever I needed done, and then be able to pick them up at the end of the day, and then spend Saturday and most of the day Sunday afternoon, start prepping for Monday. And I coach CROs on this. Like, you have to unplug because it'll consume you. Like you have to, and you got to realize why you're doing it and what's really important to you. Without having that, I don't think I could have kept my family and it's a job. Like I tell people like spending, and they look at me like sideways, like marriage is a job to you, not in a bad way, but like it needs to be thought about. It needs to be serviced. You got to plan for it. You've got to make time for it in doing stuff, frankly, that you don't even want to do, but your partner does. And you have, even though you're working, at 110 miles an hour all week, when you get home, you got to shift gears and put 110% of your effort into your family. And I think as founders, like you've got to understand that sacrifice. And if you're willing to do it, the spoils are amazing. Like the opportunity, a lot of people die on that journey. And I'll tell you, more than 50% of my colleagues are divorced that are CROs in this game.
Yeah.
Like it's a choice. You have to actively take time and dedicate. And if you can't, like I said, I told my wife, if it ever got, I'd quit. Like I'd pick her over the job. I could balance that tightrope. And you have to be willing to go say like, hey, this is a 10-year run that I'm going to go throw my entire being into on both sides, or pick one.
Yeah, when you got home, you were not in the C-suite anymore, right?
Brian, I used to call it with my colleagues, we used to call it re-entry, like you're coming back from things.
It would take me generally 2 hours. I would get home from a flight. My wife would try to serve dinner. I'd go have a drink and go sit on the patio just for a couple of
A decompression. I can just totally see that. I wanted to do a little wrap up with an IPO lightning round. It's just 4 quick questions for each of you and just spit out the first thing that comes to mind. Number 1, what's the biggest stressor that you had?
accountability, just continual accountability to myself, to my team, to the company, to my family, just continually being accountable to what I knew I had to do.
I've always thought about my job as at will and trying to earn that job to continue every single month. And so, that's a constant point of stress, very closely related to the responsibility. And that has just always been my perspective, because I imagine each and every one of us are either at this point or we're at this point where we're doing a job that was bigger than we've ever done before. And we were still going to be valuable to the organization as it scaled.
Yeah, for me, it was just keeping the company culture, keeping the mission. When you go IPO, and we didn't talk so much on the culture side, but it gets crazy and people are going in 1,000 different directions and still just trying to keep roots and really just that foundation of like, what is our culture? What are our values? What is our mission? Just keeping everyone focused around that. That took a lot of energy and effort.
Most underrated hire.
Most underrated hire was someone that worked previously with Jonathan and I at Lithium. I brought him over in the early stages to run our deal desk, and he has evolved multiple times over and has become a vice president of sales and is one of the greatest people I've ever worked with.
For me, on the marketing side, I have to go with my head of marketing ops that I used at both Zendesk and Slack. Brad, he was amazing. And, ops is one of those things that is very underappreciated and not really understood by a lot of people, but it really is what drives the revenue engine. So I could not have lived without that role, without him as a leader and a great friend.
So funny. We all pick ops. So like Jake Randall at Okta, who I didn't hire, he preceded me. He ran finance, ops, deal desk. Yeah, John Fisteo, right? Like, where's the real value? You asked me as a CRO where I leaned on for the most value out of the org outside of my sellers. It was operations and enablement. Like, I got to figure out how to make this thing as efficient as I can. And I got to enable my folks. So, but I'll tell you, Jake Randall went from sales ops. He managed a sales team. He ran finance. He ran strategy. Like, John, you guys are awesome. Right? Like, it's the yin to my yang. Like, you just can't do it without guys like that.
One thing that you'd never do again.
One thing I would never do again is pause marketing leading up to the IPO or pause your advertising. So there is a lot of SEC rules around when you go into a quiet period that you are allowed to continue stuff that you have historically been doing. Right? We want to do more marketing push and get out there. And if you wait until you officially start going IPO and you're in the quiet period, you can't just run a marketing campaign. You can't do anything that you haven't historically done. So I think for a while, we waited too long, for some of these. And what I would say is like, start doing that before you put your filing in, before you go through the quiet period. Otherwise, when that happens, you won't be able to do it.
I'd say never go into the board meeting with a problem without a plan on how to fix it. So I went in, I remember one time, and we had a pipeline problem, and you couldn't tell. The numbers were really good, but I could see it coming. And I went into the boardroom and said, look, presented, numbers look great. Next quarter looks great, but 2 quarters out, I'm getting really concerned. We got a pipeline program problem. And I remember our chairman of the board goes, Adam, we would have never known that if you didn't say something. And I was like, that's okay. I'm not here to shine, sunlight and roses up your rear end. I need help. I need to go figure it out. And they didn't have anything to give me in that meeting to tell me what to do, outside of some of the generic things that I was thinking about. But I got a proctoral exam for 3 board meetings in a row on pipeline. I mean, we fixed it. We figured out how to do it. And frankly, it was just getting some big lumpy enterprise deals to cover the gap because we just didn't have the volume to do it. We had enough time to focus on it and go figure out where to get them so we could put a strategy against it. But it's not bad if you walk into the board meeting with a problem, but you better have a plan on how to fix it. My dad told me that one time. I was like, man, I got this issue with pipe. I don't know what to do about it. And he goes, somebody does. If you don't figure it out, somebody else will. And that's where you get crucified. You can't fake it in that room. You have to have a plan. And if you don't, you damn well better come back with one because you don't have a lot of time to figure it out.
Yes, mine is never accept the best practice or the benchmark at face value. I think that we constantly need to be challenging the places we've been where it was done this way at this company, or just because other companies do it like this, we should be doing it. And I have found value and virtue in challenging the best practice or status quo across the organization. Whatever you're doing as an early stage founder that is making you great because you are a startup, how do you hang on to that as long as you can?
If you could put one sticky note on every founder's desk the day that they start their company, what would it say?
That's easy for me. I would say be customer centric. I think it's a growth engine for companies and especially those that want to go IPO. So, be customer centric. Don't forget about the customers. Be constantly talking to them.
I'd tell them product and sale. I'd say, go focus on those two things, get those two things right, and everything else will fall into place. Like if you're a founder and you're getting this thing launched, get your product and your sales right, and the other pieces will fall into place.
Is there a order of operations with product and sales, or both at the same time?
I have a mentor that calls it the head, the brain, and the heart of the organization. Everything else is an appendage. That's early stage. It's like you go get your product right. And I think what Bill said, being in front of your prospects, customers, there's nothing more important. And go getting, even as a founder, go sell that thing. Everybody's a sale. Go feel it. Go figure it out.
So mine's a combination of both Adam's and Bill's.
And it is the same today, which is the order of operations of how to create a valuable company. It is based on your ability to produce incredible business outcomes for your customers. And that first is the priority. You will then in turn create an incredibly valuable business. But it starts with product market fit and really understanding your ideal customer profile and focusing almost exclusively on ensuring that that customer is seeing those incredible outcomes in their business.
Well said.
Awesome.
Well done. That was the right move, waiting for Ross at the end.
Very articulate, Brian.
Yeah, very articulate. Gentlemen, I think we covered a lot of what John and I spoke about prior to this. Really appreciate the time. Really appreciate having met you here.
Thanks so much for your time, and a lot of great information that will help us and inspire us to continue with our mission as founders.
Hey, real quick. If you think you're too early to use Salesbricks, well, you're wrong. Why? Because you're never too early to get started on the right foot. Price, quote, and invoice your customers on day one with sales infrastructure that scales with you. No more building this from scratch and having 15 different tools that you have to shell out for and keep up with. I mean, you wouldn't start a company without an email address. Then why would you start selling software without Salesbricks? Head on over to www.salesbricks.com and start building better revenue today.